Good morning, I'm Pat Kiernan. This is Pat's Papers, our morning look at what's in the nation's newspapers. We've been looking through the headlines, and here's what we found for you today. It was a blockbuster story in Illinois. The Chicago Tribune starts today with Tuesday's arrest of Governor Rod Blagojevich and his chief of staff by FBI agents. It is the top story in almost every big newspaper in the country, described here as a staggering level of corruption. The Tribune says the allegations of putting a Senate seat up for sale are a tale of alleged public corruption unmatched in Illinois' storied history of elected scoundrels. The Tribune editorial board found itself as part of this storm after the story emerged that the governor had tried to get the Tribune Company to fire its editorial board in exchange for state support of the sale of Wrigley Field. The editorial today lunges at the governor, saying the integrity of the editorial page is not for sale. Now, the Sun-Times managed to get the photo. The front page headline is "Shame." Along with that headline, a glimpse of the governor in the backseat of a car after he was taken away in handcuffs. And the headlines are similar in papers all across Illinois. In Springfield, the Journal-Register, the headline there, "State of Shame." A truly new low is how the Northwest Herald of Crystal Lake sums it up, and the Daily Chronicle of DeKalb calls it a culture of corruption. President-elect Obama has tried to distance himself from this spectacular public drama playing out in his hometown. The Washington Post noting that Obama refused to talk specifically about the Blagojevich indictment during his only public appearance outside his Chicago transition office. Obama did say it was a sad day for Illinois. That was the word that New York Post columnist Charles Hurt grabbed onto. He says Obama needs to work up some outrage over this and declare that he is mad, not just sad. That news buried what was otherwise a nice exclusive for the Tribune newspapers: Barack Obama's first newspaper interview as president-elect, as seen here in the Los Angeles Times. He says there is an opportunity to, quote, reboot America's image around the world, particularly in the Muslim world. Now to the auto industry bailout. The House was moving toward approval of the $15 billion loan that would go to GM and Chrysler. The story notes approval from Senate Republicans still isn't locked down. One reason for the opposition is the fact that the public is opposed to the bailout. Well, narrowly anyway, according to a poll published in the New York Post this morning. The Post also prints a funny fake ad that's taken from a parody website. It looks like a minivan ad, but it says, "You wouldn't buy our crappy cars, so we'll be taking your money anyway." One more note on this story from the New York Times. An article in the business section notes that Toyota, Honda, and Nissan and others have been unusually quiet, even as their competitors in the U.S. are poised to get help from Washington. The story says any comment on the bailout could open up those overseas companies to criticism over the support they have received over the years from their governments. A front page piece in the New York Times on the bond market. The effective yield on Treasury bonds sold yesterday was 0. The Times says this is a sign of the mood of investors, that they will accept an investment with no gain just to have a place to park their cash, so if nothing else, they know they won't be losing money. Also in the Times, follow-up coverage on Jay Leno's move to prime time on NBC. The story says his challenge will be to hold the audience for the entire hour from 10 to 11 p.m. The structure of the show has always been quite predictable. The good stuff on The Tonight Show was at the beginning, and then they put the boring guests near the end in case you wanted to trail off and go to bed. That won't work for NBC stations who are going to depend on Leno now to deliver audience for their late local newscasts. From the LA Times, money is tight, and for many couples that means holding off on having kids. The Times prints a graph that matches up fertility rates with recessions in America. There's been a strong correlation over the past few decades. Immigration and illegal immigration, key issues in Miami. The Herald reporting today that the number of illegal immigrants deported by the U.S. government has now hit an average of 600 a day. A Herald reporter goes along for the ride on a deportation flight to Honduras. Corrupt politicians and newly elected presidents weren't the only people from Chicago in the news today. In the Sun-Times and many other newspapers, Oprah Winfrey says she is over 200 pounds now, and she is mad at herself. She had been down to 160 pounds in 2005. From the Wall Street Journal, and I read this with particular interest because I have money in this mutual fund, a story about fund manager Bill Miller of Legg Mason. For 20 years, he was the guy. He was the one who was famous on Wall Street for always beating the market. He made so many wrong calls in the past year or two that his fund is down 58% for the year. The Journal says Mr. Miller's picks read like a who's who of the stock market's biggest losers. From the Personal Journal section, so you've been swayed by the ads. You want to make the switch from PC to Mac. Well, now what? Some tips here on how to get your files from one system to the other. The American College of Emergency Physicians calls the overall state of emergency care in the country a national disgrace, but nowhere is it worse than Arkansas. The front-page story in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette explains the state's D- rating was the worst in the country. USA Today to finish. Follow-up reporting on page 1 after that extensive investigation by this newspaper into schools that are close to various polluting industrial sites. Public officials, after seeing some of the pollution readings, are vowing to take action in response to the findings. Finally, some surprising, or at least it was to me, surprising numbers about young people and their online flirtations. Apparently, they're not shy about what they send on email or text messages. A third of people in their 20s surveyed admitted that they have sent or posted naked or semi-naked photos or videos of themselves. And that's a look at just some of what's in the newspapers across the country this morning. I'm Pat Kiernan. We do this every weekday. patspapers.com for a complete list of all the newspapers and the links to the individual stories we featured today.